When you draw the picture of the concepts in the Quran, some of the bubbles are going to be bigger than others. It's always useful to start with a bubble that will link other bubbles. So in any system, as you all know, we have nodes, we have connections between the nodes, and we have a boundary. Now, this is really important when you're studying the Quran because boundaries are very difficult to determine because obviously it's all connected. And not only is the Quran connected to itself, it is also connected to the world to which it refers. So cutting off or finding that boundary is not very easy. I start with the concept of rizq. And why do I do that? I do that because in the very opening of the Quran, we're told, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. And then it goes on to tell us who are the muttaqin. الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ وَيُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ. So we know that we are not going to benefit from the Quranic text or understanding the Quranic text, reaping its intellectual openings, unless we are of those who spend out of their rizq. So we know that rizq is a fundamental concept in belief in being Muslim and in understanding the Quran. Now, when you take that bubble and you put rizq in it and you begin to do your map, and when you read the Quran, you will realize that rizq is related to absolutely everything that Dr. Ildus, mashallah, covered in his concepts. But it's also related to concepts that will pull in the system a bit, to my mind, for this group. Because it's all well and fine to say life systems, but then we're caught in where do we draw the boundaries? And then it becomes everything. And I tend to think when I read the Quran, I think of economics or the economic discipline as something that has to involve some form of exchange. So when I read the Quran, we had, of course, some of the concepts that I put in our chat, al-bay', which is a selling, shara, which is buying, tijara is in the Quran, which is trade, tabadul, which is exchange, sira', nisara fil khayrat, that you compete to do good, is the form of competition in the Quran. Sukhriya is a form of commissioning of each other, that we are different levels and so we can work with each other. It's not a matter of equality, but inequality is not a disadvantage in Islam because we dignify each other no matter what we have. We also have the idea of mal or wealth, and of course that's in all of its forms, and the idea of infaq. When we draw this map and we draw the connections between them and the relationships that emerge between, and of course the map gets more complex, between the actors in the system and how we identify those actors within the system. So, and how we identify the institutions within the system. This map becomes very complex, but it helps to start from key concepts, in my opinion, and to understand them correctly. When we start from a concept like the concept of rizq, we are redefining the paradigm. I call it the rizq mentality. How to think in terms of rizq. So how to know how it relates to the whole, how to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a proprietor and provider, how to understand the dynamics and the institutions of rizq. This is all in the Quran. How to understand competition, how to understand implications. All of this is in the Quran of rizq. And this is the beginning of the Muslim mentality when it comes to economics. And it's a very, very different one than the one we currently have, how we think of scarcity. For instance, of the fact that the Prophet ﷺ was hesitant or refused to fix a price or to state the price of something. And if we read the entirety of the Quran and we read that hadith, you realize that it's not about price fixing, nor is it necessarily about demand and supply. It is a taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is, and I don't translate taqwa as fear, it's heedfulness, but it's also a form of fear that you will misprice something. Because we neither know the stores nor the absolute value of anything. Only Allah knows the value of things, the value of water, the value of clean air, the value of resources. Only He knows the levels that are available, the stores of what He calls in the Quran His mercy. And so it's not that we shouldn't set prices, which is unfortunately how the hadith was understood. It's not that we shouldn't set prices. It's that those who engage in that exercise have to have taqwa, have to be very thoughtful about how they are pricing things and for what purpose. And they have to be cognizant of what the Prophet ﷺ said is a common, like water and salt and pasture. There are things in Islam that are not priced, they're not sold, they're not private property to begin with. So there has to be this general understanding of what do we price to begin with? What is amenable to being priced and controlled and what is not? So again, just to wrap up, I think starting from these key concepts can be really helpful. And really in this group, having those initial philosophical arguments, or what I call the Rizq mentality, or the way a Muslim, a mu'min should think, because that will really help in terms of moving forward and progressing towards a system or new thought that is truly Islamic.